Alright guys, today we're going to be talking about different ways to treat the edges of MDF for painting. If you've ever painted MDF panels, you know the face of it typically paints very well, but the edges always get that fuzzy textured look to them no matter how much you sand it. I've played with it a bunch of different ways, so we're going to try a few things in this video and see how it works. I just wanted to point out you're going to see me wearing a glove a lot in this video. I just have a couple of bad cuts on fingertips that I can't get to heal. It's winter time, it's super dry, they just keep cracking and getting them packed full of sanding dust. It just makes it way worse. So for now, this actually works pretty good. So the two methods we're going to experiment with for edge sealing MDF for painting in the video is wood filler. Now this is my favorite wood filler that I use all the time. It takes stain, it takes paint very well, it dries quick, it sands, all that good stuff. It's from DAP. I'll put a link in the description for this stuff if you want to try it out. The other method we're going to try is good old Titebond diluted with water. Okay, so let's just cover the details of the mixing and what I'm using so that part is clear. So for the wood glue part, I'm just using Titebond II. That's what I always have in the shop. It's coming out of my glue pot for this, but it is the regular Titebond II. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it's this DAP premium wood filler. I usually buy this from Home Depot actually. It's readily available there. I use that stuff pretty regularly, but those are the two items that I used for the testing. And then I'll kind of show you how I mix these to apply them. The goal is we want them to saturate the edges of the MDF. We don't want it to sit on the surface necessarily, which if you don't dilute the filler, it's just going to sit right on the surface. So we want to thin this down so it actually soaks in there a little bit. Same with the wood glue, which glue by itself is certainly going to do, but it's still too thick on its own. So again, we just want to thin that down. Now in both cases, I found that mixing by any sort of weight or ratios really didn't work out too well. The filler's just too thick and sloppy, and it's really hard to get accurate weights and be consistent with that. So what I found works the best for both ways is to mix just to consistency. So the wood glue, we just want to thin a tiny little bit, and I'll show you what I mean by that. And the filler, you know, it's a paste in the container. We want to get that to a like a thick paint or primer consistency, something that could sort of be sprayable, but it needs to be liquid. Thick but liquid, not a paste. So let me show you. Alright, so we'll do the filler first. As I mentioned, obviously it is a paste in the container. And how much you mix, I mean, obviously depends on how big of a job you're doing. But even if you're doing, say, a ton of boards, you need a lot of it, I wouldn't mix it all at once because it will start to dry up and you'll have to kind of remix as you go. So I do recommend small batches. So for our purposes, I'm just going to do a little bit so I can show you the sort of consistency we're after. And see, it's very much a paste and we want a liquid. So this is just tap water. I suppose you could use distilled water or filtered if you're concerned with it, but tap water seems to work just fine for me. And we're just going to mix it up by hand, nothing fancy. Alright, now if you get too much water and it's super runny, that's okay. You can just add more filler to it. And same for the other direction. If it's still a paste, if it's still real thick and chunky, just add more water. Alright, I think we're there. Let's see. Yeah. So, see, what I'm after is I just want this to be able to drip off of your paint stick. Alright, now, the Titebond wood glue is pretty much the same idea, except consistency will be a little bit different, but it takes very little water. And you see, I don't have much glue here. And you can leave it. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. See how we don't have a continuous string now. Now it's separating, but we get a pretty good and light drip there to it. Yeah, that's about it. Okay, so there's your mixing. Now both of these I applied the same way. I actually use like one of the silicone glue brushes just so I can wash it and reuse it. You could use those cheap throwaway wooden handle brushes they have at like Home Depot or Harbor Freight or your hardware store, just like the horsehair bristle ones that are real cheap, they're like $1 or something, and then just toss it when you're done. It works the same either way, you just want to get a nice coat on the edge. But that, I just wanted to make sure the mixing part was clear for you and what I was using.
So for the diluted filler method, I wanted to try sanding 2 ways. I did it once with the orbital and once with the hand sand block. Definitely better results from the hand sanding. With the orbital, I think I took off too much and it showed up pretty bad when I primed it. But the hand sand part, where you just get it smooth to the touch, worked out quite well. So here you can see what I mean. This is where I sanded with the orbital, and I was using 220 grit, trying to be careful, but even with that, you can see there's almost none of the filler left on the surface, so it's really not gonna help the edge condition at all this way. Now this shows the other edge that I did with the hand block, and you can see there's a huge difference. It leaves a lot more filler on the surface, it's much smoother. That's gonna do something to prevent that fuzzy texture once the primer hits it. Okay, onto the glue method. All I'm doing is brushing it on the edge, same as with the filler mix, but just a light coat all along the edge, and that's it.
Alright, so I just finished sanding one of the glue edge parts, and it seems really promising. We'll see when we get paint on it, but it forms a really hard layer, and when you sand it, it's very hard. I don't mean like difficult to sand, but it leaves a hard surface. So when I've sanded it, it feels very smooth. It feels like turn the edge into a much harder surface. So from the feel of it, it seems very positive that it's not going to have that fuzzy texture, and you're going to have to prime and sand and prime and sand. Probably still twice, but we'll see. But it seems promising right now. Alright guys, so we're all set up to spray here. Still got my trusty glove on. I have multiple panels in here that have both methods on them, both the diluted glue and the sort of thinned out wood filler option. So we're going to go to primer now. And probably once they're primed and maybe sanded, ready for paint, we'll know before paint what the difference is, but I'll try to show you as we go through the process and see how each one looks. Here we go. Alright, so we have everything primed at this point. Just for reference, this is all primed with General Finishes white undercoat. It's my standard for MDF. At a glance right now, I think the glued up edges, the glue and water mixture is looking a little bit better, though it's hard to tell. They feel very, very smooth compared to a raw MDF edge, which I left one. It's a huge difference. It feels like a finished edge. I can still see where there's some texture, so we'll see how it sands. And then of course how it paints, that's the real test, but the glue version is encouraging. Then on the other cabinet, again I'll show you here in a second, the edges that we use the diluted wood filler on seem to be pretty equal. The only spot I'm noticing a big difference right now is where I mentioned earlier where I think I sanded a little too far and I was seeing too much of the MDF through the filler, not leaving enough on the surface. Those seem closer to what like a raw MDF edge would resemble at this point. You can feel that bit of roughness and fuzz to it. Alright, I don't know if this will show up at all. The cameras were really having trouble focusing up with all the white. But this is the inside of the case where it was the fill that was sanded. And you can hear it probably. It definitely still has some of that MDF texture to it. Then the outsides, again, having trouble getting it to show up here, but much smoother on the outside where it was sanded a little bit less, leaving some more of that fill on the surface. Alright guys, so it's a couple days later. The project we're working on is all primed and painted now. And I gotta say, both methods turned out pretty good.
to get to the point in the end, I think I would recommend the diluted glue method over the filler method. They both perform quite well, but I think the diluted glue takes a little bit less work and it's a little bit faster. I'll put some pictures on the video because it's really hard to see what I'm trying to show in video, and even with photos I had a hard time getting a quality photo to show what I'm looking at. The diluted glue works really, really well. It dries in about an hour, and then it's really, really hard. It's tough. It's easy to sand, but you can tell from the touch it dries really hard. The filler dries faster, but there's more work. You have to do a lot more smoothing with it. You have to be a lot more careful in the sanding. The diluted glue, you kind of just paint it on, run over it quick with some 220 grit, and you're done. It's pretty quick. I'd say appearance-wise, in most places, they look about equal. Alright, so here's the process that I would recommend using and the one I'm going to use in the future. And I will put this in writing in the description below for you so you can grab it and copy it. On the edges of the MDF, if you're going to do any kind of roundovers or any edge treatment with a router or anything, do that first. Then you're going to want to sand the edge smooth with 220 grits preferred in the end. You could probably get away with 180. I wouldn't go as low as 120. Probably 220 is your best bet. I would block sand that by hand. Don't use an orbital because you can slip off the edge or you get inconsistencies and it makes the edge not straight. Use a block and sand by hand. Again, 220 grit for that. Do the roundover first, sand with 220 grit. Then you can apply your diluted glue solutions. Let it sit and dry for about an hour, hour and a half, and then you can sand it. And all you got to do is sand it with 220 grit real lightly. If you have done a rounded over edge or some sort of edge treatment, hand sand that as well. But again, just real light finger touch. And all you want is to get it so it feels smooth to your fingertips. And that's all I did, and it worked out really nicely. At that point, just check it all for feel with your hands. Make sure you do the corners too, and check those. Again, as long as they feel smooth, you're good to go. Now from there, it all depends on your paint process. I'm not going to get into your paint process or mine in this case. That's a whole separate subject. But just for quick reference, on my stuff, most of it's double primed anyway, meaning I spray primer once, I block sand with 220 grit, and then I prime again, and then I sand with 400 before I go to paint. That yielded very, very nice results on these edges. If this was, let's say, poplar I was making the face frames out of, or a pine or another hardwood, whatever that may be, I don't know that I'd get the edges to look any better than they do in this case using MDF. So that's good news. That was the goal. And I think, that opens the door for a little bit more MDF application when appropriate in a painted piece for the right area that's not going to take a lot of abuse. So again, I'll put all this down in the description for you so you have that reference on the outline. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, please comment, reach out to me. I'll answer anything I can for you. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.